Well, moving on today, Dominic Raab is expected to face fresh questions over his conduct towards junior colleagues at Prime Minister's Questions today, where he stands in for Rishi Sunak. Yes, the Deputy Prime Minister is facing a series of allegations that he bullied officials, as well as being rude and demeaning. Well, I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by Ben Glaze, the Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Mirror. And I suppose when it comes to what Labour is accusing the Deputy Prime Minister of, and indeed many members of the press lobby, there isn't a specific allegation, so to speak. There's no formal complaint against Dominic Raab. There's just sort of mood music that he was pretty demanding of staff. Due to that, is he pretty likely to ride out these allegations?
Working in Westminster for years, there have been rumours about how Dominic Raab treated staff, and in the last few days we've had former civil servants, very high-ranking former civil servants, come out publicly and talk about sort of the atmosphere that prevailed in ministries where he works. He's currently the Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister, hence why he'll be standing in at Prime Minister's Questions at noon today for Rishi Sunak, who's still at the G20 in Bali. Now, Labour's going to go on the attack, we think, against Raab, because there has been these series of allegations, and the most potent, really, came from Lord Simon MacDonald, who used to be the Permanent Secretary at the Foreign Office. And he talked of sort of this culture of abrasive, demeaning behaviour from Raab towards officials. He talked about curt language and tone that he used. Now, maybe some of these civil servants, maybe they're not tough enough, would be the argument that Raab's allies put forward. They can't take being put under pressure, the high standards that Dominic Raab supposedly demands of officials. That's certainly the case for the defence. We should say, of course, Raab denies all bullying allegations. But the fact that there have been these swirl of allegations for so long really does suggest there's something slightly rotten at the heart of the way he does treat staff.
Is curt language and that sort of demanding expectation really that bad? Is that something that we wouldn't expect happening in government anyway? Does curt language really meet the bar for something that will be spoken about over the dispatch boxes that usually handle the questions that run the country, whether someone was curt or not in their ministerial position? It
really comes down to how it's received, I suppose, doesn't it? Because without knowing the specifics of what was said, and we should be clear, we don't know the specifics of what was said from either side, it's hard to interpret whether he's just being a difficult boss, demanding as he would have it, or whether he's being really rude, offensive and bullying, as some of these staff obviously saw it. But it's careful to note here, I think, that there's been a culture change, not just in Parliament, in Whitehall over the past decade or so, but in society, like things that we tolerated 20, 25 years ago that might just be seen. You know, I've worked in newsrooms for 20 years, and I've noticed a change of how perhaps we're treated by senior editors and news desks. You know, that's different from how it was a while back. And that's no bad thing, but things that perhaps bosses could have got away with a couple of decades ago, people aren't prepared to be treated like that any longer.
I suppose when people think about how the mechanisms of government work, we often think about the stories of perhaps Gordon Brown, whether it was allegedly throwing a printer across a room, or was
mobile
it
phone?
Mobile phone, and was it? And of course, the representation of spin doctors, most famously within the thick of it, of course, harking to the way that Alistair Campbell behaved, formerly of your parish, of the Daily Mirror, once upon a time. Is it really that we're demanding things differently now of people in government than we did even 10 years ago?
I think as well, you have to bear in mind, obviously, Whitehall is a very high-pressure environment for both sides. You know, people can lose their temper quite easily, as in a lot of workplaces, and people work long hours, it's stressful, there's a lot of pressure. I think Labour needs to obviously be careful in the way it's going this afternoon, because John Bercow is obviously a Labour Party member, and he's had his own bullying allegations against him. So it will be incumbent upon Angela Rayner, who's standing in for Keir Starmer at the dispatch box today, perhaps not to go too hard, because it will be quite easy for some of the Conservative MPs, not necessarily Dominic Raab himself, but some of the backbenchers, to chuck that straight back at the Labour side. And, of course, separate from that is how much do you focus on one particular issue such as this when there's an awful lot else going on in the country and internationally at the moment?
Certainly is. No doubt inflation, the general state of the economy, tomorrow's big fiscal statement, and indeed perhaps trade deals as well will be dragged into these questions. Just finally, in 30 seconds, if you would, aside from bullying, what do we expect Angela Rayner to really dig in on?
I think as well she'll be coming across as a stateswoman on some aspects, because what we saw last night in Poland, a lot of people are shaken up about it. Your last interview, the former ambassador, sort of talked about the global implications for it. So that's a moment for serious politics, and also the inflation figures today of 11.1%, underlining the cost of living crisis ahead of tomorrow's autumn statement. I think we can expect all those to come up at noon today.
Well, not long to wait to see, but for now, Ben Glaze, thank you very much for joining us here on The Briefing this morning. Well,